Hello everyone, my name is Ritesh and today we'll discuss current affairs topic, right? And today's topic is changes to Wildlife Act. Now recently, center government have planned to change the Wildlife Act, or there are some amendments which they want to change, right? So this is all about this topic, right? And now we'll discuss what we'll discuss in this whole topic, right? First is why this thing was in news. Obviously, we'll discuss that. Then we'll discuss the changes proposed. Now, what will be the changes? What will be the main provisions that will be amended due to this, right? So we'll discuss that too. Then the concern involved with the Wildlife Act and the changes to Wildlife Act, the main concerns, we'll discuss that thing too. Then the Wildlife Protection Act, the 1972 Wildlife Protection Act, we'll discuss that particular thing. And then the constitutional provisions for wildlife. There are so many articles that have been mentioned in our constitution itself that talks about Wildlife Act, right? That talks about not Wildlife Act but wildlife, right? So we'll discuss that too because constitutional provisions are important. So let us start why this particular thing was in news, right? So in December 2021, recently, the Union Environment Ministry announced a plan to amend the Wildlife Act, right? Now, the Wildlife Act has been amended so many times, right? The Act has been amended several times. Now, how many times? First, it was in 1982, then 86, then 91, 93, 2002, 2006 and 2013. Now there are so many amendments that have actually happened in wildlife. Why? Because with time, government noticed some things. Some animals are more important at a particular point of time. Some become less important, or with due time, there are so many things that have happened in forest and environment itself. So government also have to amend these kind of acts, right? So that is why this act has been amended several times as well, right? So now let us start the changes proposed, right? What are the changes that have been proposed in the Wildlife Act? First, this bill that have been introduced increases penalties for wildlife crimes, right? First thing that government mentioned this is that the bill will increase the penalties for wildlife crimes. Earlier, it was only for for example, offences that attracted a fine of rupees 25,000 now attracts 1 lakh rupees or even more. So the penalties of the wildlife crimes have been increased in this bill, right? First thing. Second, now, there's a new and separate chapter on regulating species involved in international trade according to the CITES Treaty, right? Now, the new bill has a separate chapter related to regulating species which are involved in international trade as per the CITES Treaty, right? Now, let us discuss CITES Treaty because it is important for you as examination point of view, right? Now, CITES Treaty, this treaty, we call it Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, right? And this act have come into force from 1975. So CITES Treaty came into force from 1975. And India is a party of this treaty since 1976, right? And now, as per the CITES Treaty, participation of the CITES Treaty is voluntary in nature, right? You don't have to, it's not very compulsory for any member country or for any country to participate in the whole process, but the participation is voluntary in nature. So, again, voluntary participation. Now, this was all about CITES Treaty. It talks about the endangered species, the species that will go extinct and all those things, right? Then it came into force from 1975. And third one is India is a party of this treaty since 1976. And the last one is the participation in this treaty is voluntary in nature, right? So these kind of points you have to remember. That's it. Now this new bill that government introduced, it prohibits possessing, trading and breeding species without prior permission from CITES authorities. Now if you have to possess, trade, even breed species, then you have to take permission from the site's authorities as well, right? So if you want to do anything related to that, you have to inform sites authorities, you have to take permission from those authorities that you are doing such kind of thing in your home or wherever. So you have to inform the site's authority, you have to take due permission with related to that thing again, right? Next is the bill recognizes threats that invasive alien species pose, right? So now this new bill recognizes the threat that invasive alien species came with, right? So for example, if in a classroom we have so many person sitting here, right? Now a new kind of alien personality drop into our class, then the whole system will get interrupted, right? And the new member might add some kind of disease to the class, right? So this is just for an example what invasive alien species came with, right? They can come up with some kind of disease, they can come up with some kind of disorder that will actually hamper the whole ecosystem over there, right? Why we call it invasive alien species? Because these are not native to that particular ecosystem, and second is that they can hamper the surrounding of these kind of things, right? That is why we call it invasive alien species. Now again, let's go back to the bill. Now the bill recognizes the invasive alien species thing, which is very good, right? Why? Again we will talk about the conservation and preservation of these kind of species. So if you have to conserve and preserve some kind of species, we have to sort it out, right? If you can't mingle all kind of species in one place, right? It might happen that one kind of species take benefit of some other kind and the other will get lost, right? So again, the bill recognizes the invasive alien species, so that's very good. Now the concern with related to this bill is that the bill does not include regional invasive species. Now what does it mean? Regional invasive species. Now the bill talks about invasive alien species, but the bill does not talk about regional invasive species. For example, a particular bird or a particular animal is native to the country, but it might be invasive in some parts of that country. For example, if polar bear, I'm just giving an example that polar bear is suppose polar bear is native to India, right? It is polar bear is native to India, but there are some parts of India which is very warm, Rajasthan and all. Now this species polar bear is native to our country, but this species will get invasive in Rajasthan and for any part, right? So if a particular kind of species is native to our country, but it is not native to every part of our country, right? then it will become a problem, right? So again, the first concern is here is that the bill talks about the invasive alien species, but it does not talk about regional invasive alien species, right? So again, regional invasive species is again point of contention. Second is the amendment bill has no separate schedule for species the Act classifies as vermin, right? So again, earlier the Act has 6 schedules, right? And now the amendment bill, which talks about so many kind of species, it even talk about invasive alien species, but it has no separate schedule for vermins. Now, if we compare this with the earlier Act, now first let us understand what vermin means, right? Now, vermin actually means wild animals that are harmful or that carry some kind of disease or some kind of things, right? And earlier in schedule 4 or 5, yeah. So earlier, earlier in Wildlife Protection Act in schedule 5 they were being classified, right? So vermins were classified in schedule 5 of the Earth. Now the amendment bill has deleted that schedule. Now there's no separate schedule for these kind of species as vermin. Like now the center can directly notify such species and open them up to be hunted, including some of the species. Now see, if we don't have any separate schedule for vermins, then the center can notify them and they can be hunted easily, very easily, right? And one kind, if I'm giving an example, one kind of vermin is, for example, rats. Rats are vermin, right? So now the amendment bill does not have a separate schedule for vermins. Now this becomes a problem again. Second problem. Third one is the bill proposes changes to the schedules. Now what kind of changes? It reduces the number of schedules from 6 to 4 to actually rationalize the list. For example, earlier it was 6 schedules. Now it was only 4. Again, from the slide itself, you can see that the 5th schedule belongs to vermins, and now there's no schedule for vermins as well, right? So again, yeah, let us talk about schedule first, because we are talking about the changes that have been happened in schedule. So earlier it was 6 schedule. First schedule talks about, schedule 1 talks about endangered species, right? Endangered species. Now for endangered species, it was the rigorous protection was given, right? Rigorous protection was given, and the prohibition, there was a prohibition on hunting, right? You can't hunt the schedule 1 species, right? So schedule 1 species, these are endangered species, they have rigorous protection, and they are prohibited to be hunted, right? Now second one is that they can't be hunted except there is a threat to life, right? They can be hunted if there is an immediate threat to life, right? Otherwise they cannot be hunted. So schedule 2 is this. Schedule 3 and 4 are not endangered. Now 3 and 4 are not endangered, right? Now hunting is prohibited as well in these 3 and 4 species as well. Anyways, they are not endangered, but still hunting is prohibited. But the penalty is very less as compared, right? Then schedule 5 relate to vermin, right? And then schedule 6 belongs to plants. Now if we see, this first one is for endangered species, second one is for cannot be hunted, right? Except threat to life, right? Except threat to life. Now 3 and 4 are not endangered, 5th were vermins, and 6th were plants. So these 6 species were there in Wildlife Act 1972, right? Now again, so there are 3 concerns that we have talked about. Now 4th concern is that the bill will render the existing state boards for wildlife defunct by replacing them with a standing committee of the State Board of Wildlife, right? And it will be headed by the respective state forest minister and 10 members nominated by the minister, right? So earlier it was state boards for wildlife. Now they will replace them with the standing committee, and the composition of the standing committee, it will be headed by the state forest minister and the 10 members nominated by that minister, right? Next is, under the proposed amendments, the commercial sale and purchase of elephants will no longer be prohibited under this act. Again, this is again a serious issue. They are saying that the commercial sale and purchase of elephants will no longer be prohibited under this act. Now again, by using this clause, they will actually hamper the whole ecosystem of elephant. It will severely impact elephants. In one case, you are defining elephant corridors and all those things to preserve these kind of animals. Now in the second hand itself, government is doing this kind of thing, that they are not being prohibited under this act. Now the commercial sale and purchase of elephants will no longer be prohibited. This again becomes a very serious issue as per the Wildlife Protection Act, right? Because again, while elephants are also very important, and they will be severely affected if this clause will take place, right? Because teeth their tooth are very important for medicinal use, so obviously they will get exploited under this clause, right? Now let's talk about the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Earlier, the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, right? Now, the Wildlife Act, this act provides for state wildlife boards. First thing is state wildlife advisory boards. Then it will deal with regulations for hunting wild animals and bird. Then they will deal with establishment of sanctuaries and national parks, the regulation for trade in wild animals, animal products and trophies, judicially imposed penalties for violating the act. Harming endangered species listed in Schedule 1 of the Act is prohibited throughout India. Like I said, Schedule 1 species, you cannot hunt these kind of species. Then hunting species like those requiring special protection are mentioned in Schedule 2 that I said cannot be hunted, but if there is a threat to life, you can hunt them. Big and small game, Schedule 4 is regulated through licensing. Now, few species classified as vermin may be hunted without restrictions, and then wildlife wardens and their staff administer the act. Again, so these kind of pointers are only for the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So these pointers are for this act. Now, an amendment, again, like I've said, this act has been amended several times, right? So there's an amendment in 1982 which introduced a provision which permit the capture and transportation of wild animals for the scientific management of the animal population, right? So this amendment is important for you if a question directly comes. So remember this amendment, that it introduced a provision that permit the capture and transportation of wild animals for the scientific management of animal population, right? So if there's some kind of scientific management of animal population, then they can actually permit the capture and transportation of those kind of wild animals, right? Now, the last point is the constitutional provisions for wildlife, right? So, first one is the 42nd Amendment Act 1976, right? Now, the 42nd Amendment 1976, forest and protection of wildlife, animals and birds were transferred from state to concurrent list, right? So, earlier it was in state list, the protection, forest and protection of wildlife, animals and birds. Earlier it was in state list, but after the 42nd Amendment 1976, it was being transferred to concurrent list. Then Article 51A Clause G of Constitution states that it shall be the fundamental duty of every citizen to protect and improve the natural environment, including forest and wildlife, right? So Article 51G is important. Then Article 48A, in the directive principles of state policy, it mandates that the state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. So, if you are considering wildlife, Article 51AG, Article 48A of the Constitution mention the wildlife, and then the 42nd Amendment you have to remember, because the management, the forest and protection of wildlife was being transferred from state to concurrent list through the 42nd Amendment 1976, right? So this 42nd Amendment Act is also called a mini constitution, right? Because there are so many things that have been amended under this amendment, right? 42nd Amendment covers so many things. Now the last point is the Wildlife Protection Act provides for the constitutional bodies to be established under this act, such as National and State Board for Wildlife, Central Zoo Authority and National Tiger Conservation Authority. Now these authorities are all comes under the Wildlife Protection Act, right? And these bodies are to be constituted under this act also. So again, this was all about the wildlife, changes to wildlife. So again, if you consider examination point of view, you only have to remember the main amendment, right? So this penalties for wildlife has been increased. No separate chapter for vermin. This you have to remember. You have to remember the CITES treaty as well, right? Then invasive alien species as well. You have to remember these kind of things. Then how many schedules are there, how many what is the like standing committees there, so what is the composition of standing committee, right? So these kind of things you have to remember. Then the elephant wala thing is very important, right? Because the commercial sale and this kind of thing has not been prohibited under this new bill, so this becomes again a very contentious issue, right? So that's all for this topic. Thank you so much.